Hi, everybody, and welcome to the new and louder Nook. My name's Mike. This is
Riley.
John.
Christy.
And tonight,
Big mouth frog.
You calling me a big mouth.
What did you say, John?
we just got started. I don't know. Start calling names. This is one of those shows that we do every now and then where we didn't particularly plan out a topic ahead of time.
No.
And we've never, I mean, I think maybe once we did that, maybe. But yeah, so we didn't really quite think of a topic before tonight, but we kind of were just talking about language because, what was it, John? You said you've looked up the definition of anarchy numerous times just on Google, correct?
Yeah, I've been following for a few years. Yeah. Several years.
Tell them the whole story, because this is a really great, what you were doing.
So like etymologically, anarchy is pure, it's and without, and archy or archon is rulers, right? So it's an etymologically pure word, which is kind of wonderful. I don't think there's that many these days, you know.
Right, I see what you're saying.
But, so typically when you looked up anarchy, it wasn't horribly long ago, even Webster's had the number one definition as, something along the lines of without rulers. The absence of state government, something along those lines, very close to that. And then number two would be chaos. And I've seen more and more invert that order to the first order being something to do negative, a pejorative chaos.
Right.
And then on to the other form of it, something too loosely and maybe tightly scripted in the sense of no rulers. And today my daughter looked up anarchy, and the frame was still there when I went to Google used to just, apparently she typed it into Google, and Google fed her the definition,
right
up high on the page. And I actually should get it.
Oh yeah, you really should, because
it's really pretty.
It's
I think ominous.
Right? Yeah.
Wow.
This is George Orwell at work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
This is the memory hole. Yeah.
And so Google. Yeah, here we are. Right. Noun: a state of disorder due to the absence or non-recognition of authority. And I think that's really telling, because I think it. You can pretty solidly track the growth of concepts or the expansion of anarchy, right? So we see it starts this conversation, and generally speaking, in the 1800s and then early 1900s, and then with the state funded in schools gaining traction and the establishment gaining control of more and more aspects of the economy, so to speak, you start to see less and less of that conversation going, and then you see, someone like a Rothbard expand on it a little bit.
Right.
A few intellectuals through the mid 1900s, and then essentially Ayn Rand. There's maybe a blip in the radar going into the 60s who take her concepts further, right?
Right.
And then
Nathaniel Branden.
yeah, right. But just little smatterings of it going in the 70s and 80s and then 90s, and then Ron Paul comes along, and it brings a lot of people more towards some type of Articles of Confederation type.
Yeah.
Small state, whatever.
Looking into the history of it more.
Right, and then it just blitz, explodes. Like a bottle rocket. All this people just skip fucking small state and go straight to anarchy.
Did you ever see that? I don't know exactly what his polling sample was, but it was like a little poll that Larkin Rose did on his website, and it wasn't it wasn't. Are you an anarchist? Because obviously, if that was on his website, those numbers are gonna be skewed. But the question was, when did you become an anarchist?
Right.
and it's just there's this uptick in 08, 09 when
Yeah.
Ron Paul ran the first time, and then it still steadily goes up in the in-between time, but then it like shoots up again in 2012 to the point where it's like every year it's exponentially getting bigger the more people describe themselves as an anarchist.
Right.
Or at least that's when they realized they were one, yeah.
And it doesn't stop there. The supporting sentence for that definition is, he must ensure public order in a country threatened with anarchy, right? So
Dun,
it's telling you how to
dun,
use the word, right?
Yeah.
And then the synonyms for anarchy are lawlessness, nihilism, mobocracy, revolution, insurrection, disorder, chaos, mayhem, tumult, and turmoil.
Tumult and turmoil.
And then it gives another supporting sentence in that it says conditions are dangerously ripe for anarchy. So there we have, three, I would say, pejoratives against the word.
Right, yeah,
Versions of it, right?
Definitely.
You have to do mental gymnastics to infer these conditions from what the word means.
Right.
An absence of rulers, and you infer that an absence of rulers foments the condition of chaos.
Right.
So you have to really do some gymnastics, some mental gymnastics to come up with those definitions.
Mhm.
And then its second definition comes back around to what it should be. Number one, it says the absence of government and absolute freedom of the individual regarded as a political ideal. I shouldn't say philosophical ideal, but anyway, you got it. So,
Right.
Anyway,
So they
it is the old 1 and 2 thing, and that number 2 is actually a pretty good definition, I believe, that
right.
they've already destroyed the minds of,
Right.
like,
And then even more importantly, that the first definition, they have flipped the two.
right.
And that's very telling, because when it's listed as the first, that
That's the one
people are going to use. They're going to be like, well, that's the first definition,
Exactly. Yeah.
The second one's reserved for utopian idealists.
Yeah. People don't. And so I guess that kind of it goes on to more. Is language important? Is it so important that we need to all be like grammar Nazis, and how we you can't say it like that. That doesn't make sense. No. Do we need to go that far, or is it simply language? Is it simply that if two people can understand a word, then me and Christy, we actually communicated a thought right there. Yeah, but it was just between we understood what we were saying.
It's an ancient language.
Yeah.
Oh
So.
my God.
So the point being is that there is somewhere along the line where we have developed these more advanced words essentially being described by more syllables and consonants. These parts that say that you from a simpler concept to a more complex concept by either adding a consonant and syllable, perhaps another fragment of another word to then describe the more complex thought.
But the base of it is just people agreeing to it. It really is.
Yeah.
When you get people to agree to it, then it
But
becomes something conscious.
However, I do believe you can dumb the language down, right? And when you dumb someone down, you effectively box them into the potential extent that they can't reason themselves back out of it, right? So you totally debase the minds of people through language. It's possible by the whole wars, peace, anarchy, right? You can just you can continually box people's minds and put them in a smaller and smaller box, to where there's this fantastic divide between the people who's grown up under this construct and those who created the construct.
Yeah, and people who can imagine outside of it and communicate outside of it and have, because it goes like, it makes me think of something Terence McKenna says in his book Food of the Gods, how like language is not just like a world describing function, but like a world creating function, because by virtue of the language and the parameters thereof, in terms of just the meaning and the significance of the words and the ideas that they represent or stand for, two people will have like two different experiences of the world, so to speak, or of the same world. So Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that, John, that like it can be debased, and people's ability to imagine and conceive of, realms of possibility can be limited by the manipulation of language. I think, the thing you've drawn out is like a perfect example of that.
I think that to go back to relate back to George Orwell, I kind of said at the beginning there, or maybe John said it before I did, that it's very Orwellian for them to just change the definition like that. Just be like, that's
because people are using that tool called the dictionary as a means, to be the pack. They're using this pack
it's the collective
language.
consensus, and if you don't, it's the collective consensus.
It is a collective to
and
do
if
it,
you don't
right?
subscribe to it, then you get
Well, if you don't subscribe to it, oh wow,
But
you
the
don't
other thing- but the
subscribe
other
to
thing
it. You
is
go
too-
off and you get freedom. You're
guess
no
so, yeah.
longer part of this
That's true.
molding meld
Decaying.
of a language.
A very large part, though, of George Orwell, not George Orwell as a whole, but specifically that story, 1984, wasn't just the technological aspect of microphones and the cameras being everywhere. It was the language, and he actually stressed that. And when people would ask him about it, he goes, "It's about changing the language, in a way of." And there's a scene fairly early on in the book where the main character, his friend of a sort, the only person can really describe as a friend, his job is that he works on the Newspeak dictionary, which is what is the thing that describes their language. And instead of it being more detailed and having more words every year, the idea is to shrink it every year. Is to make it smaller. And the guy even says, kind of jokingly, as he's eating with Smith, he goes, "Oh, this is so cool what I'm doing." He's really kind of loving his job, and Winston is just listening to him and kind of aghast, but can't express it because there's cameras everywhere, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is that the guy even mentions it offhand. He goes, "Well, at one point or another, they'll just there couldn't be any sort of insurrection, because how could you have an insurrection if you couldn't describe revolution? If you can't describe it, then how are you,
And also, what I did with Cora is a book, it's called Building Emotional Intelligence. It's a book by Michelle Borda, and it goes through, and it's been many years, so forgive me, but it's I want to say, they used a word. They used a anagram, but I can't remember the anagram anymore. Anyway, the point being is it spoke to emotional traits. I want to say we were 16. But anyway, we're 11. And there were things like empathy, compassion, these kinds of ideas, right? Kindness, things like that. And the book was about helping to build those emotions, healthy emotional, being emotionally literate, so to speak. And so each chapter was dedicated towards an emotion trait. And one of the drills they suggested, is to turn on a soap opera or television and put it on mute with your child and watch it and just express what emotions you see in the people talking, right? Mm-hmm. And so part of that was becoming familiar with 31 other words that were basically synonyms with kindness. Whatever. And I'm throwing arbitrary numbers out there. But the point being is, it helps you think more broadly of an emotion, or be able to express an emotion in broader terms.
And understand your emotions.
Right, and ultimately it's about understanding yourself, your own emotions, and being able to communicate your emotions. So if you're not speaking the same language as others, it's not too hard. I've been all over the world in places where I'm one of the few English speakers, and you hang out with the only English speaker, and it's fun, and all these new experiences are fantastic. But not being able, it wasn't long before I wanted to be able to express myself in deeper concepts. And you can't, because there's no language. You're not speaking the same languages.
Right.
It's like,
You know what I mean? Barrier.
Right, yeah.
There's a language barrier.
Right, yeah. So there is a richness that you get from navigating reality because of language. That without the language, and without someone to share it with, I just would say it's potentially less rich.
Yeah, here's one. So, kind of like again relating to the 1984 sort of theme is, would hypothetically maybe there's a very short sci-fi story that can be related to this. There's an idea, kids. Go do that. Go do this one, and I'm describing it. Would all of us still be friends, hang out with each other, go to different events and sort of stuff?
In a FEMA camp?
Well, there's story number 2. Yeah. Okay. Well, we still but
I think they divide us. They separate.
yeah, they probably would. Yeah, but
Not if they were smart.
Because then we could procreate. We could disseminate our.
I like procreate.
Or practice procreation.
That's right. Sorry.
But I guess, what I'm saying is that so there are some very there are. I've been drinking, so there's some very like basic thoughts that we kind of share at some level, I believe, as being human beings.
I do too.
And so, what I guess the point I was saying relating this to 1984 was, would we all be friends if for some reason we were not able
Probably
to
not.
say the word liberty? You know what I'm
Probably
saying?
not. Well, probably not.
I don't know. Well, life would be so different if we couldn't say certain
Right,
things.
but I mean, is that where the importance of language is?
I don't know
Is
if
just at that
friendship would
basic
exist
level?
without the concept of the ability to choose.
You don't think what? I didn't hear what? You don't think
Friendship.
what? No,
Well,
you
no,
don't
but
have
you, but
friendship.
that's
It
true
would
too.
just be.
You just said something that wouldn't exist without the ability to choose, and I'm thinking here, really, like,
We can choose.
if
Well, that's what
you've been
liberty
dumbed down
is.
to a point where you don't have, and you're in a box and you can't choose, it's really hard to find to conceptually understand. And Etienne de la,
You're in a box and you can't
Etienne de la
choose.
Botte?
Yeah, beauty, bow tie.
Yeah, bow tie
Beauty.
guy, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So,
I don't think
no,
it would
right?
very
no, he said, he has a paragraph in there about how primal calling of liberty, so to speak, isn't his exact words, obviously, how strong it is. And said that it could be wiped out from the earth completely and it would still reappear because it's written so deeply.
innate.
Essentially,
Which one is?
So for
written
feral
written so
children,
deeply,
you know.
deeply
Which
in
one?
the
Yeah.
heart.
What concept?
So
Liberty.
it doesn't get
Oh,
taught.
liberty.
It's
Yeah,
something
yeah.
that is
Oh, it's
innate
just
in
fundamental.
us.
Yeah.
It's
I think
fundamental
it's
to it,
fundamental
yeah.
to the very structure of reality.
Well, because I think it's a
itself.
violation for anybody to do anything in my path is, regardless of the information I have in my head, if I'm feral, if I'm, living in the woods
It's
and I've never
aberrant in
talked to
nature.
anybody, it's my nature
It's
to not
aberrant
be,
in nature, yeah. and
to
that's
stop.
anything
Don't stop me.
antithetical,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's antithetical to
Yeah.
nature.
so,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I mean, it's so ingrained in us, and I see it like this: is that pretty much every child you meet is going to be like, well, hey, so why's this? Why the stereotypical
Oh, yeah,
question
why?
of why is this
Yeah,
guy
why?
blue?
Yeah.
But
That's
we
an important
ask
question. I think it
why
is pretty
because we
basic.
want to know
Yeah.
what's going on. We are
Yeah.
questioning the world.
Yeah.
So if you can't ask why, then your decisions are being limited, and if your decision is limited, then you're not at a state of liberty. It's though you explore as a child, you want to know what's going on in the world. We're trying to figure out, I think, as a whole, as a civilization, what is the nature of the universe? I think that's where we're going to, and we may have to leave this nice little blue marble and go somewhere else to really find out more answers to that, maybe. But
The universe is within you as well as without you.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you're not allowed to question the universe, then
Why wouldn't you be able to question it?
that was like things like the Inquisition. That's what they tried to do. Oh, well, you're saying that the
Oh,
Earth
peer
revolves
pressure,
around
right,
the
right.
yeah. So or
Stories
or
that people made up.
violent pressure
And-
to
right,
yeah,
stories,
yeah.
and then you got violence behind it because you got a coalition of people that went
Mhm.
back.
Or like what
and
happened in
created
Spain.
threats.
Yeah, Spain and
There-
all over Europe, really.
I
but-
haven't heard too many stories of people getting out in North Korea with a lot intact upstairs.
Oh, really?
Right,
I've
yeah,
not heard of
but that
that,
ain't,
yeah.
but there are stories of like families getting reunited, pulling, people out of North Korea, bringing them to South Korea, and they have to be taught to stand up.
Oh, really?
They have to be
Serious?
taught
Wow.
to brush their teeth and taught to do these very basic
Really?
fundamental
It's that
things.
bad?
Yeah.
Wow. I'm just really ignorant on that.
Yeah, so my point being is how detrimental to the human spirit and development conditions can be.
language.
Right, yeah, I
With
think.
no
Well,
language.
I think language takes the full brunt there, but I'm sure that if we were to look into it, we'd see that the North Korean authorities probably constrict, have tight reins over the language, I'm sure.
Yeah, I
It makes
don't know.
perfect sense to me, I mean, 1984's effect over there, in effect over there, so to speak. Yeah, and I don't think it's impossible to come out, like what Tay says, Booty, however you pronounce it. It's written in our hearts, but not everybody gets in touch with that.
Yeah.
Not everybody can go off script,
You can teach them.
But the point is, its conditions are not so.
Yeah.
In other words, if it's speaking not the sanctioned language, if not speaking the sanctioned language is a crime, then you'll make a generation afraid to speak.
You'll inhibit their whole.
Right,
Yeah.
they won't speak it because they're afraid, and the next generation never learns it,
Yeah.
and then they're in a box, a very hard box to get out of.
Yeah.
And that's a very dogmatic
Yeah.
thing. I mean, that to use I guess an older like historical example would be like say medieval period. You've got people of like don't say that. That's heresy. No, like you cannot speak
You will see,
certain
but I think
things,
it's
certain
more than
ideas
language,
you can't
though. I think
communicate.
it's ideas that get co-opted and mutated. It's not the language.
Well, it's
per se. I think
I
it's
think they
concepts, it's
they
distinctions
coincide.
in life, and we make those up. We make those distinctions up. And so, regardless of the language, I think you can. If people know that they make things up, you can use the same language. You just get that you make it up. You
Well,
get that the things
But
are being, the concepts are
the
being made up.
individual is one component, right? There's an external component here that is setting conditions that make it incredibly hard for the individual to, I don't want to say transcend, but basically become aware, you know what I mean, and do something other than the script that has been written for them. And I think that's a natural condition of man, but it's certainly better in some environments than others, and that globally speaking, the way I see it, the conditions are getting pretty fucking bad.
I don't watch TV, so I have absolutely no idea how bad they are.
Maybe it was just something I was thinking about while you guys were talking, was perhaps maybe why it took so long for the idea of liberty to be communicated as we see it nowadays, at least us in front of the camera see it in a very similar sense, that it took so long for that to happen. Because maybe like when you have like cavemen hunting mammoth, the idea of communicating liberty wasn't necessary because it was just
food.
well, no, it was just
That-
so completely like apparent,
Well, because you
Oh.
had it, there was no.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
right,
That it was
yeah.
just apparent.
Yeah,
it was
it
just
wasn't lacking.
simply, there wasn't a lack of it. But whereas as civilization developed, for better or for worse, you have these structures, these.
Well, there's
got-
more and more people when people have to interact with each other, and then.
Well, yeah, they find conflicts and
Right.
they're restrained from doing what
Yeah.
maybe what they want to do, regardless of whether there's a government or not.
Right.
They're simply restraining what they can and
Yeah.
can't do. So you don't get to this sort of more diamond-sized definition of liberty to this point in time, because then before then it was simply just that apparent. You didn't have to define it because it was
there
just
was no
that
reason
simple.
to define it
Right.
because
Yeah.
it just was life.
It was
it
just
wasn't
simply
You
that.
didn't need to. There was no reason to create a word that defined that because
Yeah,
You-
you know,
you were
you,
living.
you know, you're, let's just use an example, Florence, Italy, circa 15th century. Oh, gee, I've made some clothes that I want to sell. Huh, well, the guy who's usually, like, right in this spot right there in the marketplace isn't there this week. Looks like I'm just going to go hang out over there and sell my shit. You didn't, well, I don't know for sure, because sometimes different governments back then were even kind
I
of
was
fucked
gonna
up
say,
like that.
there's been
yeah,
governments
Yeah, they've done,
with-
but you probably, odds are, didn't have to get a license to put up
Yeah, I don't
a
know
stall
that to
there.
be true.
Probably not.
But there was
you know.
probably a time in life that you didn't. I'm
Yeah.
just gonna say in life.
Yeah.
I don't know the time
Fair.
frame. I don't know.
And it could be, I'm not so thoroughly
Yeah.
versed to say that maybe at one point or other they didn't come up with it, but I'm fairly certain that you didn't
I'm
have
gonna
to
say
get a
it's
license.
early on when people started
Yeah.
having to deal with each other. They started making up rules and
Right.
people forcing people to do things because they wanted life to be a certain way.
I should add too, I'm generally long-term optimistic,
Right.
Yeah.
but
yeah.
when I said that globally speaking, the conditions are pretty bad, I mean that in that there's a lot of negative things going on, and the news cycle puts that in people's face.
Oh,
And
which
they-
is so cool because
and they-
people are actually seeing
Yeah,
that.
they don't
yeah.
really see the positive
Yeah.
things, and
Yeah.
I think there are a tremendous amount of positive things going on. But
Yeah.
so I just thought I'd make a minor amendment to my statement, but
I didn't mean to make you sound like you.
I didn't feel that way. No.
John is a positive guy. Today too, but maybe not so much.
Some days, yeah, there's some off days, you're just like, fuck it, man.
Yeah.
Check it out.
Which in a lot of ways. So where do we go? Where do we go from here?
I feel like, sorry. I
No,
didn't
no,
mean to
no,
interrupt.
Go ahead. Do your thing.
Just going back to the notion of, people being able to manipulate language to reduce the possibility and conceptualization of, what could be or what perhaps ought to be in light of what is, that limiting world box scenario. Kind of piggybacking off that, like going back to the notion of how language is not so much like I think there's two things going on, like, language describes like the objective world that we all inhabit, and I think beyond that, language creates conceptions. But even language in regards to conceptualizing the objective world that we all inhabit, I think without the development of language, one's interaction with that world would be severely limited. Like, there's that example of that girl who was under her house like her whole life and never learned how to speak, and all she could really do is like eat food, drink water, and like play in her feces, and not really have communicate or have a life like we would think of having a life.
Right.
And I think she was 13 when she was found, around that age. And so if language isn't developed within those years, the world, although she still lives in the same quote-unquote objective world as everybody else, like, her understanding of that world and her ability to function in that world is severely limited by never having developed language. So I think language really is like what Terence McKenna said, in that sense of like a world generating function of being human, and
It creates our world. It creates our consciousness.
yeah,
It
so it's
creates-
important what
it
words
is.
mean, because
Well, it's
determining
important. We
what
just
they mean
choose
determines
what
what's
we-
possible and how we can conceive of and relate to the world and each other and
Sure,
ourselves.
sure.
So,
But it's not that it's a consensus.
but what if this doesn't want to adopt what this new person says? I
Then
mean,
you don't. You won't.
yeah, I know, you
that
don't have to.
concept
Then that
will die.
person can be free
The
in their
concept
own
will
way of
die.
wanting to understand the
Unless
world.
you can get some consensus because language is a mob. Language is this melding consensus that everybody agrees to it, and it changed, and it's what you don't want to believe is, what is that, the groupthink?
It's a dynamic system.
Yeah, but it's also groupthink. It's people believing a word means something or the other in order to communicate concepts. It's
Yeah, I
group-
think for the more basic concept like spoon, bowl, plate, I think
It's
those
all-
don't need to, really.
It's a concept.
It is, but it's a very tangible and like present concept. I think like more, abstract concepts like freedom or, what have you, liberty even though that's like kind of an immediate experience of the individual's like phenomenological self, that like it's an apparent like obvious truth. I think reasoning out its function and how it's possible is very, technical, and those words can differ in communication, how that's described.
Well, so
Speaking of that,
well, I see. What I'm wondering is that we were talking about. Could I get a sex robot that looks like Cave Chick? That's not like
I would hope
extra
so.
hairy. I'm like minimizing the
I don't
hairy.
think-
I mean, not she doesn't have to be hairless because like that would be too weird.
Made to
But
made to order.
yeah, probably. Yeah, so I could get a sex robot that would look, if I so desired.
I think you would have the liberty to do that.
I would have the liberty to do that. Somebody would.
I think there'd be a
provide
market for that.
that.
Humans.
Possibly.
You just have to order it.
I just have to order it. It's just a matter of
You
molding
just
plastic,
take it out.
right?
Wait, get back here.
Huh?
Get back here.
What am I
Nice
doing?
job.
It's really hard for me to cut this
No
off.
way.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Later.
Christy says bye.